Thanks for staying tuned. We look at one more story in Nigeria where Dangote Industries has strengthened its position in Nigeria's automotive sector with the launch of the latest Peugeot car model. Dangote Peugeot Automobiles Nigeria Limited, DPAN, the official manufacturer and marketer of Peugeot vehicles in Nigeria, has begun assembling the GT model of the Peugeot 308, a globally successful and award-winning SUV. This marks a significant step in Dangote's commitment to boosting local vehicle production and enhancing Nigeria's auto industry. Peugeot's first assembly of 308 model in Africa took place in Ghana in 2022. Lots of conversations on entrepreneurial and business activities on the continent, with more people finding their place in the field of play. But the big question here is, what do the youth have to offer, and what is their role in the grand scheme of things where entrepreneurship and business is concerned, I beg your pardon, on the continent? We have joining us from Zambia this afternoon, Mwala Mooto, who is a chartered accountant and an entrepreneur himself. Good afternoon, Mooto. Good to have you on Spotlight Africa this afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
Thank you so much. How is Zambia?
Zambia is okay. It's raining. I think we are just coming from drought last year. This year seems to be promising with a bit of some more rain, so we're optimistic about it. But it's okay.
That's absolutely great news to hear rainfalls after a drought. Congratulations to the people of Zambia. That calls for celebration. But we're looking at some data, looking into the fact that by 2030, over 40% of the global youth population will be African. And by 2050, the number of African youths is expected to reach about 830 million, especially in the space of business. So with this data and the numbers that we are looking at, we need to begin to have conversations with regards to the African youth's place in the business and entrepreneurial community. Yourself, an African youth, what are your thoughts about how we are thriving in the space and how well we could be doing at a time such as this?
Thank you so much. I think you have given very accurate figures, which I don't have to labor on to emphasize. All of us know and understand that Africa is a youthful population, and this youthful population is expected to grow extensively in the next few years. This comes with its own challenges and opportunities. I would say, starting with the challenges, is it brings about the unemployment challenge which we are already struggling with, and it means that this challenge is actually going to become worse in the next few years because the youthful population is tremendously increasing. Also, it brings in the challenge which we are dealing with. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. Are you able to hear me very well?
Yes, we're able to hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it also brings in the challenge of trying to see how we could share the resources that we have in each of the African countries. So with all these challenges, what I'm seeing is that the African youthful population is actually very optimistic about it. If there is a time when young people are more enterprising than before, it is this time. Everywhere where you go, young people are eager to start a business, to employ themselves. Entrepreneurship is the talk of the continent, and young people are putting themselves out there. So most young people have actually realized that there is this challenge, but there is an opportunity of them creating enterprises that can be part of the solution to resolve the challenges that Africa is anticipating. How can we best utilize this immense human resource in terms of the youthful population that Africa is bringing about? I would mention that African governments and as Africans in general, we need to start preparing ourselves to be more enterprising than before. The greatest challenge that we have on the continent is not limited natural resources, but rather it's the inability to convert these natural resources into finished products. And if we can invest more in equipping this vibrant youthful population that we are expecting in the continent to be able to transform the continent's natural resources into finished product, we are going to have a lot of enterprises that will mushroom in the continent and provide employment and at the same time expedite economic growth across the continent. So this comes about by ensuring that first thing, our education is tailor-made towards igniting that aspect in the young people that are coming up in the continent, where they are taught on how to utilize the natural resources to be able to come up with final products. Then lastly, it's also important for governments to create an enabling environment for entrepreneurs, especially youthful ones, to thrive in the continent. Currently, most young people are optimistic to get into the business sector, but they are not able to do that successfully because the environment is not very conducive. They don't have proper infrastructure to move their materials. They don't have proper power to use in manufacturing. They don't have a market that is able to consume the products that they need. They have limitation in terms of government support, in terms of funding. All these limitations just make it very difficult for young people to do business in Africa. So if we are going to position them to utilize these resources and create the jobs that we need for the future, it is important that an enabling environment is created. Thank you.
Okay. Two key things that you have mentioned in your opening is the fact that there are people that are self-employed, and then in the midst of the craze of entrepreneurship, where a lot of African youths are pushed by unemployment, we are pushed into the lower cadre of generating vulnerable employment for ourselves by being self-employed. But that is vastly different from running, MSMEs and the like. So I'd like for you to expatiate on that. What's the difference between actually running a viable entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial outfit, and just being self-employed? And how can we accelerate the productivity gap between both?
Running a viable medium-sized business requires you to have certain level of competences. It means that first thing, it is a business that doesn't evolve around one person. It's a business that is established as a corporate entity that is positioned for growth. But on the other hand, when one is just self-employed, it means they are finding some economic activity to keep them busy, and in the process, they are able to earn a living from that, with very little focus on growing that economic activity into an established.
Okay. So now there are just some key issues that we need to look at. Can you hear me?
As Africa is much more. I can hear you very well.
Okay, go ahead. You seem to, still be on your last thought.
No, you can go ahead. I was just explaining the difference between
I'd absolutely love for you to, to finish on that trend of thought. That's very important.
Yeah, what I was saying is in Africa, we need more of medium-sized businesses than self-employed entrepreneurs. Why? It's because self-employed entrepreneurs could be creating jobs for themselves. However, their impact is very limited. It's limited in a way that, one, they're generating very few jobs. Secondly, they are not sustainable because the death of that entrepreneur means it's the death of the business. When the entrepreneur is not feeling well, it means the business also lags behind. So this is actually the cancer that we have had on the continent when it relates to business. Most people that want to get into business are thinking of just becoming self-employed, where they set up a small corner shop, they run a small farm and take their produces to the market and be able to eat 3 meals a day, then that's okay. Unfortunately, we can't expedite growth at that level of thinking. If we are going to talk about growth where we are creating massive job opportunities for the youthful population that we are expecting in Africa, there should be an emphasis on the establishment of established medium-sized businesses that are creating jobs, that are contributing to the tax base of the continent, and also ensuring that much of the continent's natural resources is processed or value is added just within the continent. So it's important for us to move away from employment or small-sized businesses to medium-sized established businesses that can create more jobs and ensure more value is undertaken on the continent.
All right, let's talk about the big elephant in the room where businesses and entrepreneurship is concerned. The matter of funding and access to loans and grants and the likes to be able to move from these self-employments to MSMEs and even larger corporations. How do you think that Africa is lagging behind in with regards to funding? Also, in context, the fact that we have a lot of Western funded initiatives on the continent. The likes of the United States are trying to withdraw some of their funding, but we see funding from all parts of the world geared towards developing Africa. We've just had on Spotlight this afternoon Russia's investment on the continent. How can we position ourselves better for funding as young persons on the continent?
I think the first point is that African entrepreneurs or young people should begin to formalize their businesses. One of the challenges that I have observed in the 10 years that I've been operating in the entrepreneurship space as an entrepreneur myself or providing business development support to entrepreneurs is that most African entrepreneurs have not invested in formalizing their businesses. So first thing, their businesses are not registered with the registrars of their companies in their respective countries. Their businesses are not tax compliant. Their businesses don't have a clear business plan. Their businesses don't have clear policies on how they are going to operate. And all these aspects just makes them unattractive for investment. So the starting point should be African entrepreneurs themselves abiding by the rules of engagement. African entrepreneurs cannot always sit back and expect that financiers are going to bend to them. There is a way in which the corporate world works, and they need to prepare their businesses for the corporate world. So starting with, let them formalize their businesses, either as a sole trade, as a partnership, or as a limited company. Let them proceed and register for tax and get that tax registration certificate and a tax clearance certificate. Let them formulate a business plan that clearly states their business model, their strategy, and how they expect to grow their enterprises. Let them also have clear policies that stipulate how these enterprises are being run, from a finance policy to a procurement policy, an HR policy, an employee handbook, all those required policies that just show that they are a business that is properly structured and organized. Lastly, their businesses should be tied towards the global agenda. You have mentioned that there are a lot of donor or funding agencies that are focusing on funding projects in Africa. If you look at each of these donor agencies, their funding is tailor-made toward the global agenda, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. So if African entrepreneurs want to benefit from this type of funding, it's important that their SMEs in a way that they contribute towards the global agenda or contribute towards resolving the Sustainable Development Goals. These, to me, are important aspects which I'm seeing that most African entrepreneurs have not invested time to invest in and ensure that their SMEs are investable. So in as much as we can talk of the lack of financing in the continent, it's also important for us to highlight this aspect where the entrepreneurs themselves should be ready for the funding when it is available. Then coming to the lack of funding on the continent, much of the funding which you have highlighted or which is actually there is coming from outside the continent. But you see, we can't always as a continent depend on outsiders to come and fund our ideas or our businesses, because even when they're coming, in as much as they're coming to help, they're also coming in with their own motives that are centered around themselves. So you find that in as much as they could be managed by USA, the European Union, GIZ, CEDA, and all these other development cooperating partners from the US or from the Europe, the impact is not very much felt in the continent, because sometimes the way these funding programs are structured, it's in a way that benefits them or that keeps the entrepreneurs or the SMEs continuously dependent on these donor agencies. So that's why it's also important for African governments and African organizations to begin structuring financial instruments that are focused on funding African entrepreneurs in a way that is sustainable and at the same time is tailor-made for the African entrepreneurs and the African environment.
These are really key issues that you have touched on, but let's take one more issue before we wrap up on, Spotlight Africa this afternoon. The issue of government policies, especially where Africa is concerned, is a grave issue. Our governments either have great laws but do not have, the good instincts to implement them. So how can African youths leverage with the policies available on the continent to accelerate their businesses?
You see, policy is useless when it's not being put into practice. So African governments and African leaders are very good at talking about development, young people, entrepreneurship, SME development, but there's very little that they do in the end to ensure that these policies are actually put in place and they're able to generate the expected impact. So to me, the first point that young people should do is to see how they can get involved into governance issues. Because we can't continue expecting the same people who give us the wrong result to hopefully one day give us the best of results. As Africa, we have tried our traditional politicians, and over the years, they have proved that they have failed the continent, they have failed to provide the necessary solutions. So it's high time that young people that feel that they are capable of leading step in and also begin to find ways of contributing towards the implementation of these good enough policies. If they can't do so, it's also high time that young people begin to elect leaders that are going to be able to implement these policies. You see, like you have mentioned, young people are the majority on the continent. But the question that I always ask myself is how come there is very little representation of young people in key leadership positions? The reason is simple, because the young people themselves, they don't trust in themselves by putting in their fellow young people or people that should be able to lead them in the right direction. So when they are given an opportunity to appoint leaders or to elect leaders, they always go for the worst of the leadership because they are able to give them some beer, they are able to give them money, or they are able to give them short-term opportunities at that particular moment. So young people should raise away from this and realize that when given an opportunity to elect a leadership, they should do it in a way that is informed and ensuring that the leadership that they will put in place is going to implement policies that are progressive and will ensure that the continent is put forward. So to me, those are some of the things that we will need to begin working on. The caliber of the leadership that we have across the continent is not very good. We have a leadership that is not abreast with the challenges that are being faced by the young people, a leadership that is not up to date with how the world is moving. Right now, the world is talking about the fourth industrial revolution, making use of AI and artificial intelligence to leverage on economic growth. But do we have leadership in Africa that is able to contribute constructively to this kind of conversations on the global stage? The definite answer is no. So it means we are behind when it relates to some of these issues. And it's important that we begin to look at the kind of leadership that we put in place.
So just to wrap up, in light of the staggering challenges that an average African youth faces in their bid to become entrepreneurs, innovators across the space, what would your final words be to an African youth listening to us this afternoon, especially with the civilization that we're seeing in the job market, where, like you just mentioned, future end jobs are heavily dependent on technology and the likes? What would your word to an average African this February 2025 afternoon be?
I think my word to that African entrepreneur is that the future of this continent is in your hands. You see, there is no one who's going to come and develop Africa apart from us, Africans. So to that entrepreneur who's seeking to set out an enterprise and generate the expected impact within their respective spaces, it's important that they put in their level best and realize that they are the future of their country, they are also the future of the continent. What they need to understand is that Africa is at a point where it's actually opening up. And During this process, those that will be able to see the opportunities and leverage on these opportunities will be the next generation of millionaires who are going to change this continent. So if you are an entrepreneur outside there and you're trying to level best, my advice to you is make sure that you put in your level best. Don't put in 50% or 70%. Put in 150%. I always tell my team and my colleagues that at this point where we are, it's a do or die situation. We are at a point where within Africa, there is going to be intense competition because Africa is opening up. The Chinese are coming in. The Americans are coming in. The Europeans are coming in. Initially, they used to come and get Africans and take them to these countries as slaves or as whatever. But now they are coming in to set up enterprises. So it means when you set out to start a business in Africa now, you are competing with the Chinese. You are competing with the Europeans and others that are coming in with a huge capital base and setting out their businesses. So it means you need to put in your very level base, or else in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years, we will be back in a situation where we are colonized by economic superpowers that are coming from outside that run our economies.
Really strong conversation with you, Mwala Mooto, this afternoon. Thank you so much for coming on Spotlight Africa. Of course, he's a chartered accountant and an entrepreneur who joined us from Zambia this afternoon. Great time speaking with you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, then, all the best. Well, really key conversations that we've had with our guest, Mr. Mooto, this afternoon. Key take-home this afternoon would be that if you are a young entrepreneur on the continent who has not formalized your business, that is the first Waterloo that is keeping you from finding funding to expand. This is the much we can take on Spotlight Africa this afternoon. My name is Uyai MM. Do well to follow us across social media platforms, all of which you can find at SpectrumTVLive.ng. Thank you for your time. Good afternoon.